I only have a hazy memory of Mick singing with Alexis Korner. He seemed to be in a sweater, as far as I can recall, and there was a mop of kind of hair that shook. You know, he was a head shaker. And I thought it was quite funny, to be honest with you. I didn't take him at all seriously.
I see the joint was rocking, going round and round, getting real and a rocking, what a crazy sound.
I mean, I think he was clapped more for his nerve than his singing. But I mean, I think that, you know, that Cyril Davis and Alexis Korner were impressed that his love of the form had taken him so far beyond the embarrassment barrier.
Jagger's nerve to get up and sing with Blues Incorporated saw him invited back regularly as a featured singer behind the likes of Long John Baldry and Paul Jones. However, as Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys had somewhat stalled, an encounter with fellow blues enthusiast Brian Jones led to the amalgamation of his band and Jaggers, and the Rolling Stones was formed. Following a few departures and arrivals, the band's eventual lineup settled on Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, Ian Stewart, Charlie Watts and Mick Jagger, providing lead vocals. They pursued the club scene in London until, after a great deal of persistence, they landed a place at another principal blues club, the Crawdaddy.
Well, they came to the attention of Giorgio Gomelski, who'd started a club in Richmond called the Crawdaddy. And after a while, he caved in to the Stones' persistent sort of mitherings about playing there and put them on. The first night they were there, it was less than half full. The second time, you know, it was full up, and the third night there were queues around the block.
The band itself was playing rhythm and blues covers, and a couple of rock and roll numbers like Route 66, I think. Brian Jones was something of the focus of attention at that time because he looked the kind of business. Mick had not really quite defined his image yet. He hadn't got to the stage where he could dominate the stage and do all the little tricks that he learnt of people like Tina and James Brown and things later. So he wasn't the dominating force in the band, Brian was.
With Brian seemingly in charge, the Rolling Stones built on their early club success, and they were soon signed with new managers Andrew Loog Oldham and his business partner Eric Easton. However, for Jagger, who was still finding his feet as lead singer, this could have prompted an early exit from the band he would grow to define.
Lots of people had a vested interest in the future of the Stones, obviously, and that included their new management team, Eric Easton and Andrew Oldham, who was only 19 years old, of course, and previously worked for Brian Epstein with the Beatles as a publicist. And he discovered the Stones at the Crawdaddy Club, having been tipped off by Record Mirror. And when they got together, I think Eric Easton found that he got on better with Brian Jones, while Andrew got on better with Mick Jagger. Brian was a very important figure in the band, and he had quite a strong say-so in what was happening. And there was a point where Mick was sort of on the verge of being fired from the group because some people felt that he wasn't that great a singer. He was very enthusiastic, but compared to, say, Paul Jones or other people who were popping up on the scene at that time, he didn't seem to have quite the strength and range that other singers could bring to what is, after all, a very demanding style of music.
Brian Jones once told me that they wanted Paul Jones in the Stones, but I don't think he had the feel that Mick had. He was kind of doing what they all did, like Eric Burdon did and all the Keith Relf. They kind of tried to imitate the original blues singers that were around. Mick kind of sang it like Mick Jagger would sing it, rather than like trying to sing it like Howlin' Wolf would sing it, or Muddy Waters would sing it, or Bo Dad. He did those numbers, but he did them his way.
Everything is wrong since me and my baby party. All day long I'm walking cause I couldn't get my car started. Later from a job and I can't afford to check it. I wish somebody come along and run into it and wreck it. Come on.
For manager Andrew Oldham, Jagger's unorthodox on-stage manner secured his place at the front of the band and added a new dimension to the Stones' potential. Signing a deal with Decca Records in the spring of 1963, Oldham tried to capitalize on the growing success of the beat boom as the Rolling Stones released their debut single of Chuck Berry's Come On. The song reached number 21 in the charts, and the Stones remained more of a hit in the clubs than on the radio, which suited blues purist Jagger.
I think when Jagger starts out with the Rolling Stones, he doesn't want to be the next big thing. There is a famous quote from about 1962 where he says, you know, I hope nobody thinks that we're a rock and roll band. I think people underestimate the purism of the early Mick Jagger and the way he felt he had a mission to play this music and to bring it to a new audience.
To a lot of the people that went to see the Stones in the early days, it was a completely new experience. And the Stones version of Around and Around, or the Stones version when they did it of something like Hoochie Coochie Man, as far as a lot of the people concerned, particularly the sort of town girls, if you like, that came to see them, as far as they were concerned, those were the only versions of those songs. And you know, they weren't aware of where they came from, you know, or they couldn't be bothered to investigate.
What it was about was making people hear this music. And, you know, it was about turning people on to the music. And I think in his early days, he actually would have been very happy if people heard him singing these songs and then went and found the originals and said, hey, you know, Jimmy Reed does this a lot better than you do. And I think Jagger would have turned around and said, yep, you're right, mate, I agree.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. You're gonna give your love to me. I'm gonna love you night and day. You know my love and I'll fade away. You know my love and I'll fade away.
But the Rolling Stones' success was soon building, and they toured the UK following the release of Come On. Jagger, as the lead singer, found more and more that he was the main focus of the band on stage, and in a somewhat unique position for the time.
If people thought that Mick wasn't going to be a great frontman for the Rolling Stones, I mean, they were sadly mistaken. It's ridiculous, really, because right from the start, Mick was the focus of attention. Although many people idolised Brian Jones, he was very striking, but Mick was the man who was doing the lead singing.
We had the Adam Faith, the Cliff Richards, who were solo singers and frontmen, Tommy Steele, people like that. Fronting a sort of raw blues band, or rock band, that was something else. That was different. That was pioneer territory.
This is something quite new, in a way, because this is an R&B band with the singer as the frontman. Now, that was a fundamental change from the jazz band era. So that when Jagger had sung with Blues Incorporated, the idea, and there were other featured singers in that band as well, but they were just that, they were featured singers. So they would get their slot and do a couple of numbers, and then it was back to the main focus, which was the band leader and the band. Jagger is really creating the template for this kind of rock and roll, beat group, R&B frontman. And, you know, he's probably got various role models, but in a way, he's out there having to kind of busk it and invent the role as he goes along.
Jagger did indeed have role models, but many of his blues heroes were brought to him in sound only, leaving him to interpret their music in his own way. However, when he was able to view these artists at work, Mick was more than happy to study their performances and bring elements into his own routine.
So, I mean, in many ways, when Mick was first with the Stones, he had to improvise and work out his own steps, his own moves, and his own vocal style as well. Everything was learnt from records. There were very few American blues artists coming to Britain.
A lot of Mick Jagger's stagecraft came through watching other people. I mean, a glaring example is when Little Richard was one of the headlining acts on the Stones' first tour, and Mick would be in the wings when Little Richard was on, sort of making mental notes.
But if Mick thought following Little Richard, one of his idols, was difficult, towards the end of the Stones' first US tour in December 1964, they were booked on The Tammy Show with James Brown.
It was said that Mick smoked an entire packet of cigarettes on that day because he was so nervous about following James Brown.
Got to hire people's home. And you put them in me. Got to hire people down. And you put them in me. Right. That know you're out of sight.
Mick would see things in James Brown, like at one point James Brown span round, did the splits in the space of 2 seconds. Now that's a pretty hard act to follow.
Jagger had seen James Brown and noticed the feet movements and everything else, and had sort of incorporated that into his frontman persona.
Mick was clearly the frontman by now. He was doing all the dance steps and the moves, and of course the big influence on him was Tina Turner. If anybody was a great mover on stage, it was the amazing Tina Turner.
Tell me what's wrong.
So Mick would stand watching from the wings while Tina was strutting her stuff on stage, and of course a lot of that he picked up on that.
But he's not roaming around the stage, as he would later, because you don't do that when you're singing the work of someone you respect. And respect is something that was genuine. Don't mock Mick